Hello and welcome to week 2. Last week our focus was mainly character. This week we're going to focus on plot and some of the other elements of dramatic writing. This lecture is about what we might call traditional or conventional plot structure. Now, by traditional, I am specifically referring to the Western theater tradition, starting from the ancient Greeks and going to European theater traditions, Shakespeare, and to many of the plays that we see in the United States today. I want to acknowledge that there are other non-Western theater traditions. For example, Kabuki theater in Japan. And while this course does not cover those traditions, they are also rich and interesting and well worth studying. So let's take a look at traditional plot structure. First of all, if we go back to Aristotle again, I mentioned before, Aristotle thought that plot was the most important element of a play. Here he says, "We maintain, therefore, that the first essential, the life and soul, so to speak, of tragedy is the plot, and that the characters come second." Okay, I don't know if I quite agree. I think you really need both, right? You need characters, and you need them to have something to do. And I kind of see those as equally important. Maybe if we call characters the heart of a play or a film, we can call plot the skeleton, the structure. You got to have both. So here's a diagram of traditional plot structure. You do not have to follow this structure. Don't feel like you are bound to this structure. I like to start with it because I think it's useful. I think that many of the plays and the films that we see today follow this structure. So in many ways, it's what audiences have come to expect. If you deviate from this structure, on the one hand, it can be very powerful. It can make your work unique and interesting in a way that maybe it wouldn't have been if you would have followed that traditional structure. However, it can also, if you don't do it well, be a little bit jarring. So it's like that saying, learn the rules before you break the rules. And I think if you're starting out learning about dramatic writing, this is a helpful structure. I know that it has been helpful for me. So we start with what we call the status quo. Sometimes this is also called the exposition. And this is the world of the play or the film before anything really significant happens. During the status quo, we get to know the characters. We get to know the setting, all right? But the characters don't necessarily take interesting actions yet. That's not going to happen until this event, which is, it's often called the inciting incident. You might also hear it called the call to action, the call to adventure, or the point of attack. But the inciting incident is something that happens that shakes up the world of your protagonist in a way that things will never quite be the same. All right, so to go through an example from a Shakespearean play, Hamlet. We know that he is feeling kind of depressed. We know that his father has recently died, and we know that his mother has married his father's brother. And Hamlet is not happy about this, but he's just kind of moping. He's not taking any actions yet. Then what happens? He hears that his father's ghost has been spotted roaming around outside the castle. He goes and he speaks to his father's ghost, and the ghost tells him, "I was murdered by my brother. You need to avenge me." That changes everything for Hamlet, right? Now he has to do this thing. Now he has to find a way to avenge his father and kill his uncle. That really kicks his story into gear. So some things to keep in mind about the inciting incident. First, it needs to involve your main character. It needs to involve the protagonist. The death of Hamlet's father would not be the inciting incident of Hamlet because it happened off stage. It happened before the play begins, all right? And it doesn't really involve Hamlet directly. So it needs to be something that happens to the protagonist and we can see it on stage or on screen. It kicks the story into motion. It generally happens pretty early on, in the first 10 to 20% of the story. So if you are looking at a full-length play, let's say it's, 100 pages of script, you would want this to happen within the first 20 pages. If you are writing a 10-minute play or a very short film, let's say you have 10 pages, this needs to happen on page 1 or 2, all right? If it happens too late in the story, the early parts can feel like they're dragging and you can lose the interests of the audience, all right? The other important thing about the inciting incident is it gives rise to what we call the major dramatic question. This is the question that we as the audience are sticking around to see answered, okay? And we can often phrase it in the form of will blank do blank or accomplish blank. In the case of Hamlet, the major dramatic question, which is given rise to by the inciting incident, is, will Hamlet kill his uncle? All right. Let's look at some other examples of inciting incidents and major dramatic questions. So there, we talked about Hamlet already. To go back to one of my favorite movies, I just love dinosaurs. I always have. Jurassic Park. What is the inciting incident there? Well, our main character, Alan, is invited to visit a mysterious and possibly dangerous dinosaur park. That gives rise to the major dramatic question, will Alan survive his visit? Okay. Or how about Inside Out? What is the inciting incident of Inside Out? It comes right around page 11 if you read that excerpt of the screenplay last week. Riley's emotions learn that Riley is moving to San Francisco, leaving behind everything that she knows in Minnesota. And here I'm referring to the emotions as the main character rather than Riley herself, because the emotions control her, as we see in the movie. This gives rise to the major dramatic question, will Riley's emotions be able to cope with this move, right? Here's a couple more. Animals Out of Paper. You read the first couple of pages of that last week. Ilana is asked by Andy to tutor a student, Suresh, which gives rise to the major dramatic question. Will Ilana overcome her reclusive and antisocial nature, which we can tell from those opening pages, and act as a mentor to Suresh? Or how about that short play of mine, Mr. the Bear? This inciting incident happens right away on page 1. Brian is visited by the ghost of his sister. This gives rise to the major dramatic question, will Brian get this ghost to stop haunting him? Right? That's the question we're waiting for the answer to. Mini writing exercise time. So here I'd like you to pause the video, take maybe 10 minutes, and try to think of several different possible inciting incidents for your character's story. Right? So last week you were thinking about a character that you might want to write about for your short script for this class. Now you kind of want to think about what's going to happen with that character. What are they going to do? So think of several, maybe try to think of 3, right? Different possible inciting incidents. Make sure that they involve your character, change your character's world in some way, and give rise to a major dramatic question. All right, when you're ready to resume the video, go ahead and unpause. Okay, so going back to that plot structure, the inciting incident is what kicks everything into motion. What comes next? We have what's called rising action. Rising in that the stakes and the level of conflict are generally getting higher and higher as we move through the plot. And during this rising action, we will have a number of different plot points. So these plot points can take the form of events that happen, major decisions that the characters make, revelations, discoveries, maybe the entrance of new characters, anything that kind of changes the trajectory as we're going along this plot slope. In a 10-minute play, we also have plot points. They tend to be much more brief. So a plot point might be part of a scene in a full-length play. In a 10-minute play, a plot point might be an individual beat or a change of tactic for a character. Often we have, and this is particularly the case in a full-length play or film, a point that's sometimes called the all hope is lost moment. And this is a point where it looks like your protagonist is going to lose. They're not going to meet their objective. Everything is over. And this tends to create drama and suspense for the climax. So the climax of a play or film tends to be the moment where the conflict is the highest and where the protagonist stands to either get what they want or lose. Right? This is the final battle. Sometimes it's literally a final battle if we are if it's that sort of a genre. It can be. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. It doesn't have to be people physically fighting, but it's the moment where the protagonist either gets what they want, or fails to get what they want, and it's also the moment where the major dramatic question finally gets answered. In Hamlet, the major dramatic question, will Hamlet kill his uncle and avenge his father? There is a physical battle at the end, and the major dramatic question is answered, yes, he does kill his uncle. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. Then we have what's called falling action. So this is after the climax, after the final battle, what happens, right, to kind of establish a new norm. And then we have resolution. That's the new status quo. Things have changed. The protagonist has been on a journey. If it's a happy story, like maybe the protagonist now has what they want and they live happily ever after. If it's a tragedy, like Hamlet, maybe the protagonist is dead. You know, it may not be a happy ending, but it is a new normal. In Hamlet, we know that many of the people have died, and now another Prince Fortinbras has come in, taken over, and he's going to be in charge in Denmark now. Let's go through an example of this for the film Inside Out. So if we look at the first, say, 10 pages of the screenplay, it is exposition, it's status quo. And what we see is kind of a montage of Riley's childhood. We're introduced to her emotions one by one. We meet joy, then sadness, anger, disgust, fear. We learn their roles in Riley's life. We learn that Riley lives in Minnesota. She has 2 loving parents. We learn all about her, but nothing significant has really happened yet. Then we hit the inciting incident. The emotions learn that Riley's parents have decided to move from Minnesota to San Francisco and uproot Riley from everything that she knows, her friends, her school, her hockey, etc. That gives rise to the major dramatic question, again, are the emotions going to be able to help Riley cope with this? Then we have a number of different things that happen, right? The majority of any story is in this rising action slope. So I won't list all of them, but a few of the things that happen. One of the first major plot points is that joy and sadness are separated from headquarters in Riley's mind, and they're kind of thrown out into the landscape of Riley's mind and have to now get back to headquarters in order for Riley to be able to feel joy and sadness. At one point, they meet an imaginary friend, Bing Bong. At one point, they have to go into Riley's unconscious and wake her up from sleep using her deepest fears. Things are getting more and more intense, and the level of conflict is rising. At one point, Riley decides she is going to run away from home. She is going to steal her mother's credit card, buy a bus ticket, and go back to Minnesota. Then we have this all hope is lost moment where Joy falls into this pit of where memories go before they're forgotten. And it looks like she's not going to get out. Riley's never going to feel joy again. And everything just looks awful, right? Then we have the climax. Joy is able to escape from that pit. She and Sadness return to headquarters. They get in control of Riley again. This is kind of this moment of highest conflict where the stakes are the highest, because Riley is literally on the bus about to leave for Minnesota. And we know that this will irrevocably damage her relationship with her parents. It'll possibly put her in danger, right? This is a very scary moment. But Joy and Sadness manage to get Riley to change her mind and go back home, right? So the major dramatic question, will these emotions be able to help her cope, is at least partially answered here. And the answer is yes, they will manage it. And then we have some falling action. We have scenes of Riley, who is now well adjusted. And we see her playing hockey with her new friends. And then there's the new status quo, the resolution. We learn she's about to turn 12, and there's some foreshadowing that puberty is coming, and maybe some other complications are going to happen. But for now, it's a happily ever after. So that's what it might look like for a full-length film. What about for a short play? Let's go through this for Mr. the Bear. I think this is a short play that follows this traditional plot structure pretty closely. So we begin with Brian, and he's standing on the riverbank. Very, very quickly, the ghost of his sister appears. That's the inciting incident. And then, this is a short play. We only have 10 pages, but we can view the plot points as different tactics that the characters take, different beats. A beat is, when a beat changes, it's usually a shift to a new focus, a shift to a new tactic. So for example, Kara demands that Brian fix her bear. Brian says no. Another tactic he takes is, why don't you fix him yourself? Kara responds, I don't know how to sew, right? Brian reads the poem because she says she'll go away if he reads his poem, but that doesn't happen. Kara persists, right, and eventually forces Brian to remember some of the events surrounding her death. What is the climax here? We do not have a physical fight. It's not a literal final battle. But what ends up happening, I would say that the climax of this short play is Brian's confession, where he finally admits that he prayed that Kara would die. And once this comes out, he's sorry, he apologizes, and these two are able to reconcile. So we have some falling action where he sews Mr. the Bear's ear, and in the end, Kara leaves, and our new status quo is now we feel that Brian is at peace, that these two have managed to repair their relationship. So this structure works for any length of story. It even works for individual scenes. If you have a full-length play, you can apply this structure to any one of the scenes within your play, okay, or a full-length film. Each scene has its own major dramatic question, right? Each scene can have rising action, can have a climax, okay? So this is a very versatile plot structure. You might be wondering, to what extent should you plot your story out before you start writing it? I think the answer is a complicated one. There is no one right answer here. I do highly suggest doing at least some plotting, though. Um, you don't want to, on the one hand, lock yourself into a plot and feel like you can't change anything. On the other hand, a plot is kind of like a roadmap or a GPS. If you don't have it at all, you might find yourself wandering. And I have learned that the hard way through stories that I started writing and I didn't have a good enough sense of where they were going. Here is a quote that I like. When you overplot your story, you may lose spontaneity and feel like a slave to your overly detailed outline. When you build your story as you go, you tend to end up with a ton of subplots and loose ends that can't be tied up in a character arc that flatlines. You need to have some direction as to where you are going, but you also need to feel free to write what your heart tells you to write. So in other words, find a happy medium. Sometimes we call somebody who plots everything out in great detail a plotter. You might have also heard the term pantser. That comes from the saying, fly by the seat of your pants. This would be somebody who just starts writing without any idea of where they're going with their story. I do both. I am a plantser. So what I tend to do is start with a flexible outline. I like to, before I start writing, I like to know at least what's the inciting incident going to be. I like to know, or at least have a sense of the ending. Maybe I don't know exactly what the ending's going to be, but I have a sense of what I want it to look like. And if I have that beginning and I have that ending, I will then try to identify some of the plot points that I want to fall in between. In doing this, you can work forward. So you can say, given this inciting incident and given this climax that I have in mind, what needs to happen in order to get my character to that point of climax, okay? You could also work the other way. You could work backwards, and this is sometimes helpful. If you have in mind what you want the climax of your story to be, and you know where your starting is, you can kind of work backwards down the slope from that climax, right? So if I know I want my two characters to have a sword fight in a graveyard, all right, well, what would have to happen immediately before in order to set that up? What would have to happen to the characters before that? And you can work backwards down the slope in that direction to try to get a list of your plot points. Now, you might find that as you are writing, certain plot points don't work as well as you thought they would. I have had this happen to me many times. And that's why if your outline is loose and flexible, you will be able to adapt, right? So maybe something didn't work out the way you wanted. Well, write around it. Make your character make a different choice. Don't feel like you are bound to that outline. But do have at least your beginning, your climax, your ending, and a few of the plot points in between. I'd highly recommend at least having those things before you begin writing your draft. All right, so that is traditional plot structure. As I said, you don't have to follow traditional plot structure. And in the next lecture, we will talk about some plays that deviate from that traditional structure and do so intentionally and create very interesting effects. So I'll see you then.